All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. We got our guy Joe back, the Ruffino and Joe show. Going to talk a little Notre Dame football today. Joe, how you doing, bud?
Doing pretty good. Not feeling great about the DC hire that Notre Dame just made, but outside of that, doing pretty good.
I was going to say we'll talk about Chris Ash here in a moment. Let's talk about Al Golden though first.
Yeah.
Does it surprise you that maybe two parts? Does it surprise you in NFL, or did you maybe see him trying it again at the head coaching ranks in college? And part two of that, it's such a stupid question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Like, how big of a loss is it really? Not even considering the new hire, just how instrumental was he? Obviously, Jimmy's and Joe's, X's and O's, like that kind of concept. But he had recruited at Miami and stuff before. Like, he was a good recruiter. Just talk about him leaving for the NFL and then just how big the loss is.
Well, I think anyone who was paying attention to college football this year knows that the impact was tremendous. He was a top 5 defensive coordinator in college football this year. The fact that he was able to get these top performances out of all these young players that needed to step up, I think that plays and shows what Al Golden can do and his capabilities. I'm not surprised about him going back to the NFL. I actually didn't even really think it would make sense for him to give another go at trying to be a head coach. He didn't seem like he had those aspirations because where he came from being a position coach with the Cincinnati Bengals. He came from leaving the college game to the NFL. A guy like Al Golden, I would think, knowing his impact, one as a position coach and then two now as a DC, would have those aspirations to eventually be an NFL head coach. And that's what it sounded like when you heard him talk. It didn't feel like there was much concern that maybe he'd even take another college coordinator job if another team offered him a ton of money. This is going to hurt. It's brutal that they're losing him. We'll talk about obviously who they're replacing him with, which makes me a lot less excited. But I thought that this was something that was going to happen either this offseason or the next. I was hoping it wouldn't because there's that desire to run things back and to see if they can unlock the success that they had last year with all of the key players like Christian Gray and Leonard Moore and Bubakar Traore and Drake Bowen, all these really talented defensive guys that were super young, them coming back to see what would have happened if they were playing under Al Golden for one more year. But that's not going to come to fruition. And now here comes the Chris Ash era.
Yeah. So on him, and you got to it before I even asked. I've seen mixed emotions. I've seen mixed thoughts. I actually saw a fan blog that was like 5 reasons that Chris Ash is going to continue the Notre Dame defensive glory, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa! Maybe put down the Kool-Aid so fat. Like, I'm a homer, right? Like, don't get me
Yeah,
wrong. Like,
that's homerism.
I'll cap for my team. But I also don't. I saw some stuff that was just absolute doom and gloom, and like we just talked about another situation with the ACC. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle. Hopefully for Notre Dame fans, a little closer to the homerism side and further from the pessimistic side. But just thoughts on Chris Ash in general.
Yeah, I don't think it's total doom and gloom, but it's definitely not the home run hire that we were hoping for. I was really hoping that it was going to be Jim Leonard, who was such a highly touted defensive coordinator for his time when he was at Wisconsin, and then eventually he moved on to the NFL, and he's been there for a little bit now. Um, the reason why this isn't exciting, I'm from New Jersey. I live in New Jersey. I used to
Rutgers,
train
yeah.
with a ton of Rutgers guys,
Yeah.
and none of them had anything good to say about him. I used to love doing this when I was in college and in my first year out when I was failing at attempting to become an NFL free agent. Didn't go well. I'm just gonna be very clear here. Small, undersized long snapper didn't go well. That's not important. But I asked a ton of these guys I was training with. I always asked like, oh, what did you think of Chris Ash? Did you like playing for him? Not a single positive comment.
Hmm.
And it's not like he did anything so wrong. It's just they all didn't like his personality, and a lot of them didn't think that he exuded the traits of being a very highly successful coach. And if we look back to when he was the DC for Ohio State, he was sharing those responsibilities with Luke Fickell. Look how far Luke Fickell has gone, and look where Chris Ash has kind of laid into. He hasn't taken a big job. He got hired as I believe he was listed as a scout with the Jaguars this past year. So it's just a bit of a weird drop off for him. Knowing also the 1 year where he was the pure DC with Texas, this was during COVID, so he gets a little bit of grace knowing that it was a very complicated situation. But in 2020, they gave up over 400 yards per game. They really struggled. There were some former 5-star guys on that defense. You would have hoped that he would have been able to unlock something there. I think that there's just this general hope that he's joining a staff with an already well-rounded, unit of coaches, and that Mike Mickens, who was a great defensive backs coach, that his role will increase and that he might be a part of this defensive coordinator combination. I would hope so. That there would be optimism. If it's just straight Chris Ash, I'm not feeling great about it. I'm really rooting for Mickens to step up and to have some sort of influence and to be a co-DC with him.
You look at two other playoff teams, Clemson taking Tom Allen from Penn State, and then Penn State taking Jim Knowles from Ohio State. Does that, not that, I mean, Penn State may be a little closer because they played each other, a little more geographical, but Clemson also a playoff team that's very hyper competitive. Does a couple other big time programs landing big fish also kind of play into the, oh man, we just got Chris Ash feel?
Well, especially looking at what Notre Dame did last offseason when they needed a new offensive coordinator. And there was a lot of complaining about the results of Tommy Rees, Jared Parker. And it was coming to a point where Notre Dame fans were saying, we know you guys have the money. Why aren't you spending it? And they went out and did it. They went out and stole another sitting offensive coordinator that had ties to have been at Notre Dame with Mike Denbrock. And the results paid off in the final stretch. The way that they were able to perform during the playoff with some offensive limitations and roster limitations, it was huge. I think the general thought as soon as Al Golden left, before Chris Ash even got brought up, the minute that this news dropped after the national championship, Notre Dame fans are just thinking like, oh, we're going to be fine. We're going to spend the money. We're going to do what we just did with Mike Denbrock. I wonder who we're going to go steal away. And it ends up being somebody who wasn't really even on the radar for most teams. It kind of screams Brian Schottenheimer to me, where nobody wanted Brian Schottenheimer, but yeah, go ahead. You can hire him.
Jerry Jones,
There's no
though.
competition. Yeah, it kind of gave that vibe, which is why I think we're all quite a bit frustrated.
All right, let's talk recruiting a little bit. You talked about some of maybe the impression that guys had from playing with him. Do you have expectation? I mean, like we mentioned, Al Golden had recruited really well at Miami, considering what he walked into, the NCAA stuff they were under almost immediately. It's still, I mean, recruiting at Miami, to be fair, I wouldn't call it the most difficult job in the world.
Right.
There is some benefits that come with recruiting South Florida in a logo like the U, but there are some benefits to recruiting Notre Dame too. Thoughts on him as a recruiter?
On Chris Ash as a recruiter
Yes.
specifically, my thing with him, knowing what he did when he was at Rutgers, it's very underrated. I don't think it's talked about enough how much of a hotbed for talent that this region of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York City, even in the Northeast, if you go all the way up to Massachusetts, has been a budding area for some top recruits. If you're Rutgers, you're not going to get the premier 5-star guys that end up deciding to go and play at Notre Dame, or they end up deciding to go and play at Alabama. They're just not going to be in the mix for those top guys. But we're seeing right now with Greg Schiano, who's doing a really nice job of getting some of these 4-stars, some of these high 3-stars. Chris Ash didn't do that when he was at Rutgers. Chris Ash, and that was, I think, the big reason why there was such a fall off. There was not much success, at least getting some of the quality names in the region, in the state of New Jersey. There is pride from guys from here that they want to represent Rutgers. There's more pride than people realize. And the fact that he wasn't able to capitalize on that definitely brings a lot of concern. And just the general, I mean, game management. They barely won any games in the 3 years that he was there. The results are worrying. I keep coming back to knowing what he's around makes me feel a little bit better. And I would hope that there's a little bit of an ease in knowing that, what Marcus Freeman does and the role that he has in recruiting, that Chris Ash isn't expected to bring in any big fish right away.
We've been closer to the concern side. I'm going to have you at least, try to look at the homer side of this. Is there anything that he does really well from a coaching perspective, in-game preparation, evaluation, development? Is there what about him does have you excited? Hopefully the answer is not like nothing. I hate this, but like what can you be positive about with Chris Ash?
Well, the problem is we don't really have the context. That's my problem. So I am kind of answering nothing here. He has 1 year as a true DC, and then he was a co-DC with Luke Fickell. So I don't know what I don't know. And that's, I think, actually the positive spin on this. There's not enough knowledge to really know if Chris Ash can end up panning out and being a great DC. Like there's so much room for improvement. That's the way that Notre Dame fans need to look at this to feel optimistic about it, is that he's joining a great coaching staff that was already really good on defense last year. As long as he doesn't tank this thing into the ground in the, below the 50s in total defense, as long as they're staying in the top 20s and all these young guys play as well as they did, him not having a lot of DC experience is like true DC experience is a little worrying. But at that same time, it makes us think, hey, maybe we didn't see the best of him. Maybe we didn't get him in the best possible situations to completely succeed.
Yeah, the Notre Dame fans in the comments are either going to be raging that we weren't ultra positive, or
I think a lot of them agree with me.
in full. I was gonna say, or in full agreement. Like, what the?
Yeah.
We did talk about it. I mentioned this quickly, and it is a cliche. The Jimmies and Joes matter, and they still have a lot of talent. And
Right.
I do think that a defensive coordinator can absolutely screw that up at times. We've seen talented teams just look lost. I mean, look at Tallahassee. But I do think that the talent does matter a lot. And it would be pretty surprising if Notre Dame just fell off a cliff completely defensively next year.
Right.
We'll see. It was very surprising what happened with my team this year. But I think it'll work out fine. Is he the long-term answer there? I don't know. But I think Notre Dame would be fine in the short term. So, Joe, where can people follow you? Where can they find your work, bud?
You can catch me on Twitter at Joe DeLeon, and then be sure to check out the Ruffino and Joe show. Me and my co-host Blake Ruffino. There was plenty of arguing over the Chris Ash hire. There will be plenty more arguing the entire offseason. Appreciate it as always, DJ.
Thanks, buddy.